This episode was made possible by our incredible donors. Their faithful support allows us to continue the work of amplifying the voices of religious abuse survivors. We committed early on never to monetize any of the stories, so we rely solely on donations from people like you. If you value the work and are able to contribute, you can become a monthly donor at the link in our show notes. Another way to support Bodies Behind the Bus is by following, rating, and reviewing the podcast. It only takes a moment, but has a tremendous impact on our reach. Thank you for daring to listen.
Happy New Year from Bodies Behind the Bus. We are starting out this year with an excellent episode. We're joined with Ciji Wagner from Louder Than Silence. We're talking about what trauma-informed spaces should actually look like, as well as how harm can compound in faith spaces. So be sure to stick around for that conversation in just a minute. But first, I wanted to update our listeners that we just sent off a $5,000 check to our DACA recipient fundraiser that we did. So that immigrant family now has those funds to be able to pursue justice for themselves and to secure legal representation. We're going to leave that link in our bio so you guys are able to continue to give to that cause. We will earmark it for that family if you feel led to do that. I also wanted to update you guys that it's looking like we're getting a pretty sizable series together for YWAM. So if you've been listening to Bodies Behind the Bus for any amount of time, or you know someone who experienced harm within YWAM, now would be a great time to reach out because you could tell your story in a group of people rather than as a one-off on your own. Either way, reach out to us. We'd love to talk through the pros and cons of coming forward and telling your story. With that, I'm Jonna Harris for Jay Coyle, and this is At the Bus Stop by the Bodies Behind the Bus podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Bodies Behind the Bus podcast. We are excited to have a guest here on the At the Bus Stop episode. This is another episode. We're really excited to be talking to Ciji today. She is the founder of Louder Than Silence. I was going to do a bio, but I would probably not capture everything correctly. So I'd love, Ciji, if you could give us a quick intro about your work and who you are.
Sure, yes. Yes, I am the founder of Louder Than Silence. Louder Than Silence is an organization that provides long-term care, community, and resources for survivors of sexual violence. And we do that all at no cost to participants. So what that practically looks like and means is that we pay for this trauma-specific healthcare called EMDR. And then we also have robust community structures. So we do workshops, retreats, book clubs, writing clubs, you name it, but really providing that strong support network with other survivors. And my background is kind of wild and all over the place. I have a degree in baking and pastry. I worked in the restaurant industry for 18 years, took a very sharp right turn into nonprofit land. So that I feel like is a whole separate conversation, but that's the little short snippet that got me to where I am today.
And weirdly, when you say that you used to work in the restaurant industry, I immediately thought about the bear, obviously, because that's what everyone's thinking of. But two, I'm like, that's actually not that different if you think about it. The way that the things that he experiences in that, I'm always thinking about with my experiences. So
yes,
yeah, weirdly also similar in culture.
In the very first episode of that show, there's one scene in particular that I'm not going to describe, but when I watched it, I was I could feel the panic starting to rise, and I was just like, oh no, that's happened to me so many times. I can't do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I feel that. Well, I love that you guys offer resources towards EMDR. That has been a huge help in my own life with trauma that I have experienced. I know we've pointed listeners to that often. And I know I've gotten a lot of feedback from listeners who have done EMDR therapy, and that was a therapy that really worked for them. Obviously, it's unique to whoever you are, what's going to be the best modality for you, but a lot of people have seen a lot of success with EMDR. So I love that. Well, I'm really excited to jump into this conversation with you today because we talk about
offline, like off of the podcast, we get a lot of questions about how to enter into healing spaces, or what does this look like to be in community? Is there support groups, stuff like that, where, you're coming out of an environment where there were not really good boundaries modeled. There was not a lot of safety, and there was a high expectation of vulnerability. So today I am really excited to talk through what it looks like to be in a trauma-informed space. What is a trauma-informed space? A lot of people have a nebulous idea of what trauma-informed is. So would you mind kind of digging deep into what that would be?
Sure.
What people are looking for?
Yes. So the way I frame looking for community spaces is kind of like green flags, yellow flags, red flags, right? But to start, the concept of trauma-informed spaces, I think a lot of us, especially a lot of listeners, right, of this show, are like, yes, like I know the concept of safe spaces or trauma-informed. But when you're like, okay, literally what does that mean? Most people are like, I don't actually know. Right. And so that's part of what I enjoy doing, is helping demystify these things so that people feel like, oh, I have the information now. I know what I'm actually looking for. So when we think about trauma-informed spaces, we're looking at spaces that prioritize safety, right? So not just physical safety, emotional safety, psychological safety, like the comprehensive, like holistically, any human walking into this space can feel protected and just able to be fully present and not have to worry about all of the other stuff, right? And that all of those other things are mitigated to the best of the ability, right? Like each of us have our own experiences that cause specific reactions, of course. And we also know, generally speaking, what feels safe and what doesn't, based off of our own internal friction or not. And also these like trauma-informed spaces are very like transparent in what they're doing, right? Willing to share information, being very communicative, demonstrating the like, we're not hiding anything here, right? Like this is who we are, and you get to opt in, right? Like you can say, oh, I understand who you are, and maybe it's just not for me. Great, but like you know who we are, and then it's consistent. Right. It is, okay, this is who we are, and consistently we show up and we're demonstrating that we are who we say we are. This builds trust, right? That so many people who have these wounds and these like, traumas from past experiences are afraid to trust, understandably. And so we want spaces who are like, yes, I understand it's difficult to trust. So therefore we are intentionally building systems and structures to demonstrate our trustworthiness, right? It is the intentionality behind that makes a big difference. And then really like utilizing this idea of like collaboration, right? Wanting to hear different perspectives, wanting to hear people's experiences, and how that impacts them, how it impacts the whole community, right? That it's not just a like, oh, up here in leadership, we've made this decision, and like, who cares how it impacts people? The other side of that, right? The like, okay, let's understand, for us to all come together, what that means. And really wanting to encourage agency in each person, right? The ability to say, this is right for me or not. This is something that feels good and encouraging and beautiful or not. And trusting the person to know what is good for themselves, and wanting people to be able to make those decisions for themselves. And then generally speaking, the people who are leading the charge, do they understand PTSD? Do they understand trauma responses? Do they like have a concept of what this is and how to include it? So those are kind of like, I could talk for an hour and a half just on those, but I'll stop now.
Yeah, that's so good. I was just thinking like how informative that is to just have that definition. And I was just thinking through like, coming from a faith background, like that's not something we talk about ever, especially when it comes to like agency and like things like, does this feel good? Like, does this feel, am I comfortable here? Like, I don't think I've ever heard leaders talk about those things, especially not from like a pulpit perspective, but even like I'm thinking like in like small groups, like it's never about that. And so it just leads me to believe like, I mean, again, we're going to go down a lot of different topics, but it just makes me realize like how our baseline is just off, like our basic baseline, and like just to reset that would be so encouraging for people,
Yeah.
especially in faith communities.
Right. Well, I think that there's a lot, or maybe I'll speak from my own experience in some of the faith communities I've been in, where there's a sense of really kind of focusing on this perspective of like the heart is wicked, you can't trust it. And it's like, okay, well, how are we balancing that with like if we believe that the spirit of all truth and understanding dwells within us, but then we're also saying we can't trust what we sense from within us. What does that mean? Like, are we saying we can trust that what's within us is actually divine? Or is it automatically somebody from the outside has to tell us what that should look like? And so I think a lot of us are learning how to reclaim that sense of, no, I can trust this sense that I have. And it's often not something that's promoted.
No, and we can move on, but I was just thinking as we were recording this, we've been going through an Austin Stone series, and I just been thinking about how like in that space, like especially when we're talking about things like sexual abuse or grooming, things like that, how like that, what you just described, CG, when you say, can I trust my own instincts, like how that erodes in places where there's a real emphasis on, no, you can't. And in my opinion, like opens the door to people that have, that have intentions that are not pure, that are evil, predators, to really prey onto that type of, I guess, not condition, but situation, to where individuals are like, can I trust? It's got to be so. I'm just thinking like in that church alone, like it has to be so confusing for people, and so like just a total mind F, to where it allows those high control institutions an ability just to get by. Like they can just get by. They can say, oh, it's a bad apple. But really they're creating the system that allows that type of behavior to even exist.
I guess that's kind of like a good segue into like discussing what is the responsibility in setting. So as faith leaders at various points, like what is their responsibility to steward trauma? Because it does come into churches, like where there are people, there is trauma.
Yes.
How should we be expecting churches to handle this, especially in like a small group setting, or maybe like something that I think often is utilized is like the idea of a discipleship group or an accountability group? What should our expectations be there? What expectations should faith leaders be setting out there? And like, what is the point where this is actually not a good place for this type of work to be happening, and we should be outsourcing?
I think really where it starts is people, like individuals who are in leadership in whatever fashion, right? Whether it's a discipleship group, small group, or like literally standing up in front of the pulpit, at the pulpit every Sunday. It's what is my own capacity, right? Like each of us should be able to reflect on ourselves to say, what do I have space for? What do I not have space for? Right. And that's just kind of the baseline, because what I might have capacity for as a leader in those spaces will look very different from both of you. Right. Because like we have our own experiences and understandings, and we have to know where our lane is. So like step one is just like, what's your lane? And like, we should all know that if we're in any position of leadership. And then kind of like step two of that is understanding the difference between like big T traumas. So those are the, like, they immediately shove us out of the window of tolerance, which I can go into that concept a little bit more if you want me to. But the window of tolerance concept is that any one person can handle some amount of stressors, right? Like physical stressors, financial stressors, emotional, psychological, right? It's all kind of part of it. And, we have something that might kind of push us towards the edge, and then we like regulate, we come back to the center. Well, what happens with traumas, so big T traumas, we're automatically outside, right? Like these are the things like sexual violence, being in a war zone, etc., right? Where I can no longer regulate again. Like I'm just way outside of what I can tolerate, and I can't figure out how to get back in. Like it's been too much. So that happens, right? Big T traumas happen. But then there's also little t traumas that build up to the point where we can also no longer get back into our window of tolerance. So a great example of this is COVID, right? So like, okay, went through COVID, maybe you got long COVID, maybe you were in lockdown and totally isolated, you were living alone, and then you lost your job, right? So like any one of those might be tolerable, but then we get to a point where it's just like, I can't manage anymore. It's just too many things stacked on top of each other. And so when we talk about leadership, it's like, okay, for most leaders in most like religious spaces, they don't have training for big T traumas, period, right? Like those are what you need like professional mental health care intervention for. Like there are experts in helping people come back from big T traumas. Great, they exist, wonderful. But I think it's the little T traumas that are kind of more difficult to navigate, right? So like, sure, a leader might be able to help somebody if they lost a job, right? That's a little T trauma. Or they might be able to help somebody who's going through a divorce, but depending on, using divorce as an example, was there abuse involved? Is there like ongoing damage that's happening? That might be then a big T trauma. And so being able to then recognize the like, okay, this person is dealing with this acute situation that they just really truly need peer support, right? They just need somebody who understands, maybe can help in tangible, practical ways sometimes, but is a like, okay, this might take 3 months to get through, but then we'll be on the other side, versus a like, oh, this person can't regulate. Like, so this one particular thing is actually now in the realm of professional healthcare intervention is the thing that's needed. And so it's really understanding the nuance of all those different pieces.
I'm just thinking, like, I'm playing, like, as you're talking, I think this is so great, especially when you talk about the window of tolerance. And I'm just replaying like the stories that we've shared on the podcast and how like with a like to the T, every pastor and leader that we've shared has failed in recognizing their inability to help a situation that is out of their scope or out of their lane. They have plowed through it head first, full on, thinking they're right. And then they get to the other side and they still are like, we're still right. And I'm just like, just like what you're saying, like it just makes, like it just connects in my body. And I'm like, man, like just this basic stuff. Like we're 16 minutes in, 16 minutes. And I'm like, just these 16 minutes, if leaders would just sit down and listen and take this in, like how much more, just how much better we could be at the conversation when we're having some of these topics come up. I think what I would also say, and John, I'd love your take on this because I love your perspective, that little T trauma. I think we see that a lot in these settings to where they just build and they build and they build to where they get to the point to where they're unbearable as far as an individual, and they become something that takes someone, puts someone in a deep spiral of their faith and their mental health. I would love for your like profession, like I know you said it can't expand that window of tolerance, but is that common to where you just continue to get those little T traumas in your life and they just come like waves, that those can grow and expand to be not the equivalent, well, yeah, the equivalent, but feel like that big T trauma over time? Is that something that you see, Ciji, in your side?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we think about, like, we can all think about our own lives, right? And there are times that we can think about where it's like, oh, if this thing that happened today happened then, I would have been out of commission, right? Like there are times of like additional stressors and like just it compounds, right? Just kind of by the nature of life that there's like cycles and ups and downs and whatever. But when our baseline is this understanding of our place in the world via, these like religious spaces, if we believe that this like foundational core piece of who we are is not stable and we can't make it stable, right? Then like that in and of itself makes it harder to have a bigger window of tolerance, right? Because like we don't even understand the baseline. And then like not any one of those interactions becomes like the thing, right? It is like, oh, like this person said this thing and this situation happened. And then it gets to a point where, like you said, unbearable, I think is a great way of describing it, where it's just like, I cannot keep doing this. And it does just become so unmanageable that it can feel like the equivalent of a big T trauma, because there's still that same inability to return back to center, right? Like to get back into that window of tolerance, because there's just too many open threads too, right at that point.
I think that this kind of will make sense to listeners even more so when you think about some of the stories that you've heard on the podcast. I think what Bodies Behind the Bus does well, honestly, I'll like pat our back, is we share stories where it's not often like a big event that we can point to. It's often these small things that build up over time. And so to bring listeners into kind of what an intake call can feel like, sometimes we'll talk about, as you're starting to place events in your timeline for your story, as you're starting to work out your story, think about the moments in your story where you felt a change in a shift in your body. And it might not actually look like this big overreach or this big thing where you can point to, hey, my boss screamed at me for an hour and a half. It might be a subtle comment that was made in a small group that now you feel unsafe to show up as your whole self there without being judged. And that matters that we talk about that, because that shift in your story is what is the next puzzle piece to why your body experienced this as honestly a big T trauma over the course of your story. So I don't know if that helps kind of like frame it for listeners, but as you've heard stories and you think that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, and then you get to the end and you're like, oh, that's why that one thing was a big deal. That plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this pushed this over the edge to, usually we can use the term abuse correctly in these stories. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of something that we're doing behind the scenes as we're doing story work with our storytellers.
John,
Something
I was going to make one point to that, and then I'll let you go on, because
Yeah.
I think it's valid for what Ciji said earlier about how when that happens too, if you're in places where there's an emphasis on self-hate or self-loathing, you're wrong and evil, when those little T traumas, at least in my thought, when those little T traumas happen, you can kind of minimize it and say, well, it's just me. It's just how I'm perceived. It's just how it's my interpretation of the Bible. It's how I'm perceiving this conversation. And
I'm not trusting
I'm not
God
trusting
enough.
God enough. I'm sinning. And it just creates this like unhealthy loop. And that's why I was like, man, like just this basic language, if leaders had it, how much healthier the sheep would be. Like if the shepherds had a healthy heart with dealing with this and bringing in people that actually had expertise and didn't minimize these things and didn't plow through that building head first. Like it's just a cycle that's super broken. Anyways, that was all I was going to say. Jonna, go ahead. Sorry.
Do you mind if I actually touch on one more
go
thing
ahead.
connected to this thought? Which is when we are in these abusive situations, right? The coping strategy is to minimize it at the time, because our bodies and brains understand that if we feel like we are under threat constantly, we cannot survive that. And so like one of the things that I experience a lot is this sense of like, oh, it wasn't really like that bad. It like wasn't that, and then people start like digging in, and then they look back and they're like, that's what it was? Because the brain only allows us to actually process what we can manage with our window of tolerance as we rebuild it, right? So like there are still things that I get to look back and be like, oh, that's what that was. But in the moment, it was a more like self-deprecating, like, oh, it must be me kind of perspective, because that's what I needed to get through that particular thing, because I didn't have the space to actually see it for what it was. And that's a very common experience.
And not only is it common, but a common thing that I hear from people who call into the podcast is shame surrounding that. Like, I didn't know what it was. I should have been able to see this. And something that we talk about a lot is actually, we need to honor your brain and your body in that moment for not giving you the whole picture, because it was protecting you from not being able to take the next step the next day. Like, it
Right.
is, our brains can only handle so much. And when your brain says nope, then that is something we have to honor. And that's actually something I've talked about in little bits and pieces on the podcast as I've talked through my own processing that I'm still doing probably forever. But something that I've had to work on and am still working on is the fact that my brain doesn't trust my judgment, because I have pushed through boundaries that my brain has put up and continued to allow myself in situations where my brain said nope, but I kept pushing because I was just going to deal with it later. And here I am dealing with it later publicly to thousands of people. So anyways,
Isn't it funny how life works out?
isn't it funny? There is something in this vein that I would like to talk about that I've been talking with some pastors about over the past few months, actually. I still believe in Jesus. I still actually have a high view of God's word. And I think a portion of it that I take very seriously is the idea that if you're an elder or a leader, a pastor, I even took this on myself. I think small group leaders should have this. I believe in the doubly accountable for your actions, for how you care for the people that you have been entrusted with. And I have told a few pastors that part of that to me, and part of what I wish faith leaders would be considering, is you're doubly accountable to set healthy boundaries. So you're doubly accountable to not allow the people that you are, I mean, you can't allow or not allow someone, but to set boundaries correctly so that people are aware that you don't have the capacity or the ability or the skill set to enter into something in the way that is needed. So if you have someone come to you and ask you for something that you do not have the expertise for, you're accountable to carry them through what those next steps look like for them to find the resources they need. If you enter in and bulldoze through into a space that you don't have that expertise for, and you cause harm, you're doubly accountable for that, in my opinion. So I don't know if there's a way for you to kind of like put that in a professional wording that's not draped in religious language, but that's something that I've been wrestling with some pastors lately.
Yeah, so the specific like language around accountability is very much a like, you know, this space type of wording. But I think if we frame it even from something like a professional standpoint, right? Like if we're talking about like a workspace or whatever, it is, you know, like clients aren't necessarily considered like staff, right? Like it's a different perspective. And so it's a like, okay, well, like if you promised a client something that you knew you would not be able to deliver on, what would be the outcome? Like eventually you would lose your job. Like eventually it would come to turn, oh, like this person keeps over promising and under delivering. And so like we have examples of like, oh, in other spaces, we don't tolerate this. Like we understand that it is crossing something that like is harmful and hurtful to other people. And so I think one of the things that would be helpful in a lot of these like faith spaces is how do we translate some of these ideas that we understand in like secular settings and apply them to these particular spiritual and religious spaces. Because with that example, I don't think anybody would say, oh yeah, overpromising and under-delivering is a great way to do business. But like in faith spaces, often that's what we're taught to do almost. It's like, and so it's like, okay, like there's such a big divide there. So how do we come to terms with like, yes, like collectively we can agree on overpromising and under-delivering hurts things. Like it cannot possibly be beneficial. So like let's just start there.
That's so good and so helpful. And then I think like even a step further, we often see people who don't know that they can't deliver. So
Sure,
it's like
yes.
the audacity levels we're dealing with here are extra high, where they're like, yep, I got this. Or, there is this idea that, God can step in and fill the gaps, which, sure, but also you have an ethical responsibility to point people towards resources that they need, and to know that like being a pastor is not the same as being a trained therapist or psychologist.
I think that part of what is complicated is that there is this idea of like having the title of pastor means that you are now qualified to be a counselor, right? And like there's plenty of instances that I know of where people had 1 credit hour of counseling training, and now they are considered to be able to like fully counsel whomever comes to them. And it's like, no, like that is a scratch in the surface situation right there. Like if some people get full master's degrees where like the entire time is how do you make space for people and help them through these things, that cannot ever in any circumstance be covered in 1 hour.
Well, this is even like in Texas, you have clergy taking over school counselors.
Right.
Positions. Like, it's so bad. And really, like, I guess we can wrap up that whole conversation with clergy stepping into a school counselor position. You're held doubly accountable for the ways that you fail because you don't know what you don't know. You cannot know. You are not trained to see or to know. You were equally trained as I was as a worship leader. Mm-hmm. And less because I'm an adoptive mom. So I actually had to go through hours and hours of trauma-informed training. Like, no. Okay. So
Johnny,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, you have pastors leading churches that don't even have seminary degrees. They don't even have degrees in their own field. They're just hired off the street. And that's, to me, is crazy. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a pastor. So now I'm a pastor counselor / whatever else you want to be. So, I mean, the idea that we throw around, I think it's because, I know it's because of the Bible. Like we sit there and we say, well, the Bible is all that I need. And that has failed us since the beginning of the time of whenever the Bible came out initially. Like it continues to fail us. And we continue to use that book to weaponize and justify our inability to just seek help and not be an expert on everything.
Regardless of how this has sounded, I know some really great people who are pastors, who are doing a great job of caring for the people that go to their church. And even with that, I know they are like drowning with lack of training and resources surrounding stuff like what we're talking about today. So what are some things that would help promote personal agency in congregations and in these spaces? What are some things that they could say or ways that they could help kind of foster that? And honestly, disciple people into personal agency.
Yeah, I think it starts with the leadership understanding what their own personal agency looks like, right? Being able to hold the space for ourselves to say, I don't know how to do this, is the first step, right? Because we are kind of in this space where we have church leadership who is saying, well, like my agency extends actually farther than what it actually is. And so it's first teaching, okay, like leadership, know where your agency actually ends here. And then it is like honestly being willing to say, I don't know, or I can't help with this, or hey, do you actually know that there's a trained professional for this like specific thing, and helping take the stigma out of that, right? That there is still a lot of stigma, especially around mental health care in a lot of these spaces. And so I think what I would encourage a lot of church leaders to really focus on is how are you specifically destigmatizing people getting mental health care for these things that the church leadership is not qualified to address. And if we can take those steps, then it helps demonstrate to another person, this is what your agency is, right? Like, yes, I am here as another human to help walk alongside of you, but I am not the one who is doing this work with you. here are the resources I know of that exist. These are the folks who have the capacity for that. And being able to like delineate between like I can sit in a space with somebody who's going through something really, really hard and painful and not try to fix it for them. And that takes a lot to be able to say, I see your pain. I see how much you're struggling. And there are literally 0 things I can do. But here's what you can do. And I will be right next to you as you're doing those things. You're not alone. You're not isolated. You're not forgotten. This is not a I don't care. This is a I care so much that I'm going to help you figure out for you what is a good step, what's a good fit, what's out there for you, so that you get to understand, oh, this is what I can actually do for myself.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I just think about how like I think about how I would receive that now. Is somebody, if a pastor or leader would share that with me, if I came with them with something. And I honestly, I'd see, it makes me feel more seen, because they're recognizing not only my struggles, but then they're also recognizing their own limitations, but then they're still offering their support, like their support and that's really what we want. We want to be seen and supported. And like, I also think like, to say for pastors, like the more we hear about pastors in these spaces, like I definitely feel like that pastors, not all of them, but a good portion of them really start out thinking like, that's how I want to be. I hope they do. And then over time, it seems like they run to the Bible. Like I have to run to the Bible for everything. I've got to be everything for all people. And it impacts their life, and they get burned out, they get, whatever. And I just think about the freedom that what you just described gives back to them, because then they can focus on what their primary, lane should be, which is shepherding the flock. And that is shepherding the flock. That's how you do it. If we could briefly like segue before we kind of get to that last topic about, I've seen churches before, I've been in churches to where they really talk about mental health in a way that it's sin-based, like taking medicine, depression. I've heard pastors really say like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but this was a sin for me. Like taking medicine or depression was a spiritual attack. Can you just talk a little bit about, like, from your perspective, how that weaponizes those two things and what it does for us, or how that hurts us in the situation, how it really derails the conversation?
Yeah, I think there's like kind of like 2 different points there. One is around the concept of, if we're in a situation where we're outside of our window of tolerance, can we utilize the tools that exist to help us get back into our window of tolerance, right? And for some people, that is medication, right? Like that is a tool. Therapy is a tool, like, peer support's a tool, right? There's a bunch of different tools that exist. And if somebody needs the specific tool of medication to help them regain that sense of stability, like it's kind of confusing to me why that would be then considered off limits, right? Because like if there are resources available, like it's like that joke, right? Where like there's a hurricane coming and the guy like prayed like, God save me, and like there's like the person that came by in the truck, and then there's a person that came by in the boat, and then there's a person with the helicopter, and then turned all those down, and then the person dies, and God's like, yeah, but I sent you all these things. Like, is it not the same thing? Like, if there's all these tools available, but we're saying, oh, these are off limits because like we collectively have decided they're not in line with our faith, then is that not kind of doing the same thing? I think yes, personally, but that is obviously why it's my opinion that I'm sharing, and people get to argue with it if they want to. But I do think that there's something about like not demonizing tools, right? And like, can tools become overutilized and then like to the point where it's like then preventing additional health? Yes. But like that is also for the person to explore and navigate. So the other kind of vein of what you said is around this idea of like, well, if you're experiencing depression or experiencing, like mental health issues, then it says something about your morality, basically, right? And so I think that is particularly challenging because many people get their sense of identity from their faith communities. And so if suddenly me experiencing depressive symptoms because of the trauma I've experienced, it no longer becomes about like, oh, depressive symptoms are actually part of the process of getting through trauma. Then you're trying to suppress the body's actual processing mechanism in order to not lose that like structural community space and the idea of identity and who we are. And so like understanding that if we are experiencing these things, if we're experiencing depression or anxiety or any other number of like mental health care issues, it is because the body is saying, hey, something's gone awry. This is how it's manifesting. Let's get to the bottom of why it's manifesting so that it doesn't keep manifesting. But then if we like layer on top of that, but you're not supposed to be feeling these things, and like maybe you should pray more, or maybe you should like, seek godly counsel, or maybe you should read the Bible more, then it becomes a whole list of like, well, if I do all of these things, then the symptoms go away, but we're still not actually addressing the actual root cause. And then it won't go away. We've now just compounded the problems by like layering other stuff on top. And so it's just like more and more issues instead of just being like, oh, you're experiencing depression, let's address that, and then we can move to the other side.
I think another even further layer to that is, one, the further step into compounding that trauma is, in some Christian expressions, they would even say it's a demonic presence. So it's like the demon of depression. So this hyper spiritualization of mental health struggles, especially mental health struggles that are stemming from trauma, that are like appropriate body responses, involves the sacred, involves God. So that actually creates a new, potentially big T trauma for someone as they are grappling with whether or not God sees them as wicked because their body is responding this way. And that is so bad, like life-altering bad. People die because of stuff like that. I did want to touch on a little bit more of this agency piece before we move on, and just speak to an example in my own life where I have seen this done well. Is actually not modeled necessarily in these moments where someone's coming to you with a trauma as a faith leader that you don't have the tools to walk them through what it looks like to heal and to be resourced. But more so even just when they're engaging ideas or topics surrounding the Bible. I think a way to really cultivate a culture that encourages personal agency is to not be the person with all the answers all the time. So a way that I've seen this done well, and again, I hate being the person that's like, I rubber stamp this, but the church that our family has been at for the past year or so, off and on, they often from the pulpit will teach on parts of the scripture and will say, this is what I see, but what do you see? And they invite people into the conversation and they're like, I'm not going to tell you that this is 1000% what it is. Like, you go seek it out and see what you feel and think when you read it, and then come back and tell me. And it is that collaboration piece that you spoke to in the beginning happening in a church environment. And that is already setting expectations and relational expectations for congregants and the pastors. But also it's modeling like what's going to happen when they come with something else. And just briefly, we don't see this in Christian evangelical cultures really ever. So if you are a pastor starting to do that, you are probably going to have congregants that are upset at you because they have no understanding or place to put personal agency. They expect you, because of the ways that Western evangelical, especially in white spaces, Western evangelicals have created an expectation and hierarchy in our church structures. They expect you to have all the answers. They expect you to know what to do in every situation. They expect you to speak for God. So you are going to be having to painfully and through the mess teach people personal agency. It's not going to be just like all of a sudden everybody's rainbows and butterflies skipping through a field. Like, it will be hard. You will get pushback doing this.
Yes. And I think kind of a connected thought to that is the concept of like who gives permission for something in these faith spaces. That I remember when I was in this particular like faith leadership role, somebody came to me and she was talking about the concept of like she felt led to lead this like contemplative prayer group, right? That like she like knew other people interested in it, and she's like, well, is it okay if I do that? And I'm like, I'm not going to give you permission. Do you feel like God is telling you to do that? Because like that's where the authority is. Like, it's not like who am I to say, no, I don't think you should follow this thing. Like, if you feel led in this way and that you have the space and the heart and right, like just because I'm in a sort of leadership role doesn't mean that it is up to me to give permission to you. And so I think there's also that understanding of like where, like that's connected to agency, right? Like if we expect that we have to get permission for something, then that means that we don't expect we have our own agency in that thing. And so also like untangling that knot a little bit in these communities, right? To say, okay, like, yes, of course, if we're doing something that impacts the whole church community, then like, yeah, the leader would be making those decisions, of course. And there's still personal agency to be woven into this too. And so it is up to, again, the collaborative idea. If we're collaboratively understanding what it looks like, where this is where I end and my agency ends, and this is where, you know, yours is and yours ends, then we can know where the middle ground is and how to meet there and all of those things.
I could just imagine like one of these pastors like John MacArthur, John Piper, like what if they like from the pulpit being like, what does that mean to you? The verse, like the Bible? Like the congregation's head would probably explode. I mean, I know John MacArthur is dead, but like John Piper and all those guys, like their head would explode. Like, what do you mean? What does it mean to me? Aren't you supposed to tell me? Like that's just been taken out of the equation. Like this concept of like asking like you to have agency. Like I love the way that you just said that, Ciji. Like I'm not I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how you're alluding to like giving back the power to make a decision to the person you're talking to when you're in a faith position, like that's just so amazing and loving and caring. And I think like our brains, like in evangelical spaces, are not wired that way right now. We are very much wired to like want to sit in the pulpit, receive it, and move on and not think that way. And like getting that back is a huge, I think it's a huge gift. I don't know how we get there as a collective group, but wow. I sit there thinking, because I went to the Village for a long time. When I was in Texas, if somebody in the Village had said like, what do you guys think about the Bible? Like, I don't know if I would have known what to say, 25-year-old Jay. Like I would have been like, what are you talking about? Where's Matt Chandler's book? I need to know what he thinks. So,
well, I think too, this conversation can even step out. So a lot of us have maybe deconstructed, reconstructed, left like the mainstream evangelicalism. Maybe people are like trying out different progressive sides, which also have their own stuff. Like it's prevalent. But I see this in the deconstruction and even survivor communities that are online, where because we don't have any framework for personal agency, we look to people who will just tell us what to do or what to believe. And so part of deconstructing like harmful stuff for any of us, all people, including you, if you're sitting in a church pew right now, should be deconstructing some of this stuff. Like that is part of the human experience. Sorry if deconstruction sounds like a scary word. It's really not. But like we need to be cognizant of the fact that we don't have frameworks for this and work towards having a framework for that, and not expecting, like, it is important for us not to look to one leader of any one thing to tell us what to think or believe about X, Y, or Z. Part of personal agency is regaining that for yourself by studying for yourself on a topic that you are passionate about or have an opinion about. Like learning to listen to your gut, learning to be, I mean, honestly, contemplative practices are actually really, really helpful for people that are trying to move out, because it's teaching you to be like, come back into communion with your own body and your own soul and your own feelings and thoughts and emotions. I just want to point out, this isn't just an evangelical mainstream thing. Like you can see it anywhere. You can see it in politics right now. People just want you to tell you what to do, who to vote for, and they don't want to actually engage with how those concepts affect their individual body and soul. They just want to be told what to do and then move on. But that's not like the full human experience. And it's actually doing harm to all of us to not honor our bodies and learn to honor our bodies. Well, that was a big, long tangent. Sorry, guys.
It was incredible.
Well, I think it's also maybe a segue into talking about spiritual bypassing and some of the things that we see. We've hit on a few examples of spiritual bypassing already in this conversation, but I would be really interested to hear like where you see spiritual bypassing happening in these spaces, or even outside of these spaces, as people are starting to process and like what the difference between spiritual bypassing and actually facing trauma head on looks like.
Where I see spiritual bypassing bubbling up a lot is when the feelings start to become unmanageable, right? Like we start to be in this place where it's too much, right? And so there's multiple different types of bypassing. There's intellectual bypassing, there's, all sorts of distraction bypassing. And spiritual bypassing is a particularly interesting one because it is connected to this concept of like, there is a being outside of me that will make my decisions for me, that will change my life circumstances for me. And if only I can find the right set of words, practices, etc., then that being will take all of the hard things away. And so it makes it this like really kind of messy, complicated thing too, because like our communities are there, our families are there. And so it's, also connected to this sense of like the community piece. But when we're saying, oh, I am disconnecting from the things that I'm feeling, from my body, from my emotions, from myself, in order to say this entity outside of me will step in. And if only I can find this like perfect set of things, then that will fix it. And that leads to, again, this like kind of performative, like layering on top of the trauma, but it's like the person themselves layering on top of the trauma, because there's like such this deep belief that this is what it looks like and this is what it has to mean. And so really to take a step away from that is to say, okay, I am feeling overwhelmed. Can I just sit in that? Can I trust that the divine is with me in this moment of feeling overwhelmed? Like, can I feel peace from that? Like, can I understand that, like, this is not something to be dismissed or disregarded, but can I sit in this very human experience and know that I am not alone in it, that there is something greater than me that cares that this is my experience, and I don't anticipate that entity stepping in on my behalf, that I understand that it is up to me to do the emotional, psychological work and the spiritual work of staying connected to the divine at the same time. And that takes a lot of space. that is like not an insignificant like set of steps to take. And it is understandable, especially, connected to this concept of autonomy and who is, who offering permission and whatever, but being able to say like, oh, I recognize that my life is here because I've made a set of decisions. And if I want my life to be there, I need to make a set of decisions. And my faith is a priority to me and will continue to do so, right? And that's really what we're hoping for and what we're encouraging. Like, faith is a beautiful thing. Like, it changes so much. And it is not like a set of like miracles that will come together if only we can figure out how to like convolute ourselves enough so that they will come to fruition.
Yes, so good. There is no Da Vinci Code to get your way out of dealing with trauma.
Right.
And I think all of these things that you've told us today are so helpful, especially for people who are trying to figure out what's next. A lot of people are desiring to be in faith communities, but for one reason or another, based on trauma, are currently not in faith communities because they aren't finding places where they feel they can bring their whole self or feel safe. And, and again, thank you, brain, thank you, body, for telling you this isn't a space that you should be right now. This isn't safe for you right now. But I think this is a piece that we all have to reckon with, that we haven't been given these tools. Most of us haven't.
Right.
Maybe 1 in a million has. Like, that rare.
Very generous.
That was generous. Maybe 1 in 10 million has. But if you do desire to be back in some form of a faith community, you learning these things is actually like proactively protecting you. It's educating yourself and protecting yourself from experiencing what you did in a former situation or a prior situation. Is that right? Prior. Yes. A prior situation. So if you have these tools, if you are in touch with your body, that is a protective measure. And it's going to give you data as you walk into places, as you're looking for whatever is next. That is very helpful. And dare I say, I think God wants that for us, for humans in general. The God that I believe in desires us to understand and know ourselves, know our relationship with the divine, and be able to have the agency and understanding to walk into these spaces, the discernment to walk into these spaces. But we have to learn ourselves. We have to grow these muscles, or we don't have it. Like, it's not just something that you just magically get because you Da Vinci coded your way into it. Like, you have to actually take the time to work on it. And it's beautiful. And I just want to set expectations. It also sucks. Like,
It sure does. Yes.
It sucks to start realizing all of the ways that we are deficient and all of the things that we need to do and all of the hard stuff that we need to stare at for a little bit. And like, it does suck to sit in something that's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fun. Like, I think a lot of people probably know that just through listening to the podcast. There's people that are like, I have to take a break sometimes because it's a lot of hard stuff. And I mean, Jay and I get that because that's our every day, all week sometimes. But this is something that's worthwhile. And growing those muscles is only going to be a benefit to you and the people around you and the people you love and care for, and your ability to be in healthy community in the future. Mm-hmm. Like, it is dependent on you taking that step for yourself.
Very quickly, because I know we're running rapidly towards the end of our time, that when you talked about the concept of discomfort, I think that there's a really good clarifying point here, which is discomfort comes when we're growing, and discomfort comes when we're in a space that's actually not aligned with us. And so, like, understanding ourselves is such an important thing, because we can sit in a space and be like, oh, I feel a lot of discomfort right now, but it's actually because it's challenging all these old patterns and I'm growing, versus I feel a lot of discomfort right now. Oh, that's actually because I don't feel like this is in alignment with like who I am and my values, and I can make a decision based off of that. So like, discomfort in and of itself is neither good nor bad. It is understanding the like second layer there to make the informed decision.
That is so good and so helpful.
That's really good. Wow, that's really powerful too. I like that. I like how the way you describe things, Ciji, because you're just, it comes from a place of not only experience, but just very balanced and just very much like speaking from a point of bringing your body at ease. Like when you talk about things, I feel my own body be like, oh yeah, I'm connecting with things you're saying, but I feel an ease about it. Even the parts that make me want to squirm and make me uncomfortable, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, but I can have a little bit of ease here. And I just think about how refreshing it would be. And again, I hope there's churches that model this. I haven't seen one. I know Jonna talked about her church. I haven't been to that church, so I can't speak to it. But I can say, like, I hope there's churches out there that model just laying down the notion that you have to know everything, and giving agency back to the flock, and then also just encouraging people, like Ciji and other voices in the communities, because there's people like that out there to speak in and participate in conversations where their expertise is needed to help the flock. Because I'll be honest, like, we don't know everything. And I would love for people to be able to go to a church and talk to someone who says, you know what, I'm not an expert here, but I have this network of people that are qualified and do X, Y, and Z. And you can reach out to them. I would love that. That would be amazing. And I hope that's out there. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here are the speaker's own and not those of this podcast. This content is presented for informational and educational purposes that constitute fair use, commentary, or criticism. While we make every effort to ensure that the information shared is accurate, we welcome any comment, suggestion, or correction of errors.